Scroll disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction inspired by real-life emotional experiences. It explores themes of love, betrayal, emotional conflict, and personal transformation. The purpose of this story is not to encourage or justify infidelity but to highlight the emotional complexities behind human relationships. Reader discretion is advised, especially for those sensitive to themes of emotional and marital conflict. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Sophia had been married to Daniel for nearly 8 years. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, had a beautiful little girl named Ella, and a Labrador named Max who greeted her every evening like she was the sun itself. Daniel was a dependable man, steady, kind, and predictable in every way that counted. Their life was built on routine, safety, and comfort. Yet Sophia felt something stirring inside her, something she couldn't name, and dared not speak aloud. Every morning, she made breakfast. Daniel would kiss her cheek, thank her politely, and leave for work. In the evenings, they'd talk about Ella's school projects, grocery lists, or the leaky faucet. It was all fine. But that was the problem. Everything was always just fine. There were no spontaneous hugs anymore, no shared jokes that left them breathless with laughter, no deep conversations late into the night like they used to have when they were younger. It was as though their relationship had become a quiet agreement rather than a living connection. Sophia had a good job as a graphic designer. Her days were full of meetings, emails, and endless revisions. She was respected, even admired for her talent. Yet there was a growing disconnect between what people saw and what she felt. She smiled often. But it rarely reached her eyes. Sometimes at night, she would lie in bed next to Daniel and stare at the ceiling, wondering if he ever noticed how far apart they drifted. She would recall their honeymoon in Italy, the way he used to look at her like she was the only person in the world. Those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life now. She loved Daniel. Or at least, she told herself she did. But love without depth had started to feel like an echo, familiar but hollow. It wasn't that she was unhappy. It was that she no longer felt anything deeply at all. And in that numbness, a dangerous silence had begun to settle. Sophia didn't know what was missing. She just knew something was. And she had no idea that this quiet ache inside her was about to pull her into something she never thought herself capable of. Something that would change everything. It started on a Tuesday. Sophia was presenting a design pitch to a new client at her agency. She walked into the conference room expecting a routine meeting, slide deck, feedback, polite goodbyes. But then she saw him. Liam. He wasn't the main client, just part of the team. Maybe mid-30s, confident without being arrogant, sharply dressed, with a quiet intensity in his eyes. When Sophia started presenting, he watched her, not just the work, but her. Like every word mattered. Like she mattered. After the meeting, while others were gathering their things, he lingered. "I really liked your concept," he said with a slight smile. "You made branding feel like poetry." Sophia blinked. No one had ever said something like that before. Most clients just wanted revisions or cheaper timelines. "That's kind of you," she replied, surprised by her own flustered tone. That should have been it. But over the next few weeks, there were more meetings. More casual chats. Emails that began formally and became warmer. One afternoon, he sent her a song link with a message. "This reminded me of your presentation style, soft but powerful." She listened to it in her car later. The lyrics made her chest ache, though she didn't know why. It was harmless, she told herself. But she also started noticing things. How she checked her phone hoping to see his name. How her heart raced when she knew he'd be at a meeting. How she wore lipstick one shade bolder when she knew he'd be there. One day, after a long client session, they ended up alone in the break room. It was late. Everyone else had gone home. Sophia was pouring coffee when Liam leaned against the counter beside her. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's version of your life?" he asked quietly, looking straight ahead. The question hit her like a wave. "All the time," she whispered, before she could think. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them felt loud, charged, almost magnetic. She could feel the electricity in the air, and it scared her more than she wanted to admit. Liam turned to her then, his expression unreadable. "I think people like us. We settle so well we forget we're not really living." And then, as if sensing the line they were both towing, he stepped away. "Good night, Sophia." She watched him leave, heart pounding. It was the first time in years that she'd felt seen, really seen. And that feeling, that tiny flicker of emotional connection, was more intoxicating than she expected. She told herself it meant nothing. But deep down, she knew something had begun. And it wasn't going to stop. What started as fleeting conversations and casual compliments began to evolve, slowly, almost imperceptibly, into something deeper. Sophia found herself thinking about Liam more often than she liked to admit. He had this way of making even the most mundane things feel meaningful. A passing comment about a book turned into a 2-hour email thread dissecting its themes. A joke about bad coffee became a daily habit of texting each other their morning brews, complete with sarcastic commentary. And yet, not a single word between them had crossed any official line. Nothing overtly inappropriate. Nothing that could be printed and shown to a boss or a spouse as proof. But in her heart, Sophia knew what was happening. At work, she caught herself waiting for moments when their paths might cross. She started staying late, just in case Liam did. She checked her phone obsessively, hiding the tiny thrill she felt whenever his name lit up the screen. One evening, after a particularly rough day at home, Ella had a fever, Daniel was irritated about a missed utility bill, the silence at the dinner table was heavy and sharp, Sophia sat alone on the balcony, phone in hand. She texted Liam without thinking, "Do you ever feel like no one really knows you?" He responded almost immediately. "All the time." What followed was a cascade of vulnerability. She told him how exhausted she felt, how lonely marriage could be, how sometimes she missed who she used to be before life became so routine. Liam listened. Not just with his words, but with attention that felt profound. He didn't rush to fix her or dismiss her emotions. He let her feel them. He made her feel valid. That night, they spoke on the phone for the first time. It was just after midnight. She whispered into her pillow, afraid to wake Daniel. Liam's voice was warm, low, steady. They talked about dreams they'd abandoned. Regrets. Songs that made them cry. It was intimate, not physical, but emotional in the most dangerous way. Over the next few weeks, it became a ritual. These late-night talks, the stolen glances at work, the way Liam could read her moods with a single look, it became their secret universe. Sophia began to feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Her heart fluttered at texts, her skin tingled at the thought of him, and she smiled at memories that had nothing to do with her husband or her daughter. It still wasn't an affair, not officially. But her heart had already left home. And in some ways, that was a far greater betrayal than anything physical. She told herself she could stop. That she hadn't done anything wrong. But inside, she knew a boundary had been crossed, and it was only a matter of time before things moved from emotional to something more. It happened on a rainy Friday evening. The office was nearly empty, just a few lingering staff and the faint hum of printers and rain tapping against the windows. Sophia had stayed late again under the guise of finishing a project, but deep down, she knew why she was still there. Liam walked past her desk on his way out, paused, then turned back. "You done for the day?" he asked, smiling like he already knew the answer. Sophia looked up, heart already picking up speed. "Almost." "You?" He shrugged. "Not really. But I could use a break." "Coffee?" She hesitated. Just a second. A single breath. "Yeah. Sure." They ended up at a quiet cafe just around the corner. The kind of place with dim lighting and corners that felt too private. They sat across from each other, sipping slowly, conversation coming easy, too easy. But the silence between their words had changed. It was thicker now. Loaded. Heavy with everything left unsaid. As the rain poured harder outside, Liam leaned in slightly. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia nodded. "Why do you keep looking over your shoulder every time we're together?" She laughed nervously. "Habit, I guess." "No," he said softly. "It's fear. You're afraid of how this feels." She swallowed, her throat dry. "Shouldn't I be?" Liam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached across the table and gently touched her hand. It was a small gesture. But it shattered everything. Sophia didn't pull away. She couldn't. Later that night, they ended up back at his apartment. It wasn't planned. Or maybe it was, just not spoken aloud. They stood by his door for a long time, the silence between them louder than words. "You don't have to come in," he said gently, voice barely audible. Sophia stared at the doorknob. Her heart thundered. She thought of Daniel. Of Ella. Of the life she had built with such care. And then she thought of how numb she'd become. She stepped inside. What followed wasn't rushed or reckless. It was slow, deliberate, and painfully intimate. It wasn't about lust, it was about being seen. About connection. About feeling something she hadn't felt in years. "I've never felt this way before," she whispered against his skin, and meant every word. That night changed everything. Because once you've crossed that line, once you've betrayed not just your partner, but your own sense of who you are, there's no going back to innocence. The next morning, as sunlight spilled into the room and reality began to set in, Sophia lay awake beside Liam, eyes wide open. The guilt hadn't hit her yet. That would come later. Right now, all she felt was silence. The kind that comes after a storm, and just before the next one begins. Sophia woke up before Liam the next morning, wrapped in unfamiliar sheets, in a space that wasn't hers, surrounded by the scent of a night she couldn't undo. She sat up quietly, glancing at her clothes on the floor and the soft rise and fall of his chest as he slept. The weight of what she'd done pressed down on her like a slow-moving wave. Not panic. Not yet. Just the heavy realization that the person she thought she was no longer existed. When she slipped out of the apartment and stepped into the pale morning light, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Ella's still got a bit of a fever. Can you pick up her meds today?" Her heart cracked. Back home, the house was quiet. Daniel was in the kitchen, bleary-eyed, pouring cereal. He didn't ask where she'd been so late. He didn't notice the slight tremble in her hands or the hollow in her gaze. Maybe he had stopped looking a long time ago. The day unfolded like a balancing act, half her mind at home, the other still tangled in the sheets of a different life. That evening, she sat on the floor of Ella's room, brushing her daughter's hair as she hummed softly. Guilt clung to her like a second skin. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Because part of her still wanted Liam. And that truth was more terrifying than the affair itself. At work, things were just as complicated. Liam acted normal, too normal. Professional smiles, quick glances, the occasional text that said nothing but meant everything. "You okay?" he messaged one afternoon. She stared at the screen for a long time. "No. But I don't want to stop," she typed back. Then deleted it. Then typed again, "I don't know who I am anymore." He replied instantly. "You're just someone who wants more. That doesn't make you a bad person." But didn't it? Sophia felt like she was living two lives, one where she packed school lunches, smiled at neighbors, and lay in bed beside a man who trusted her completely. And another where she stole time, kisses, and pieces of herself with someone who saw her in a way Daniel hadn't in years. She thought about ending it. Every day, she told herself, this is the last message, the last meeting, the last excuse. But then Liam would say something, soft, kind, knowing, and her resolve would crumble. She didn't know if what they had was love, but it felt like freedom. Like truth. And yet, it was rooted in a lie. The weight of her double life grew heavier with each passing day. She wasn't sure how long she could carry it. But she knew this, something had to give. Because living between two worlds meant eventually, one of them would fall apart. And when it did, she had no idea which side of it she'd still be standing on. It happened on a Sunday. The house smelled of pancakes and syrup. Ella was in the living room, building a puzzle on the floor, humming to herself. Daniel was at the table, sipping coffee and scrolling through emails on his tablet. A quiet, ordinary morning. Until Sophia's phone buzzed. It was a message from Liam. Last night was perfect. I still feel you with me. She had forgotten to silence her phone. She had forgotten to delete the thread. And Daniel, as casually as ever, glanced over at the screen when it lit up on the table between them. 1 second. That's all it took. His face didn't change at first. He stared at the message as if trying to convince himself it didn't mean what it so clearly did. Then slowly, he looked up at her. The expression in his eyes was something she'd never forget: confusion, hurt, disbelief, and something colder than rage, realization. Sophia, he said, quietly. What is this? The words stuck in her throat. Time slowed. Her pulse roared in her ears. Ella was still humming in the background, and the normalcy of it made everything feel even more surreal. Daniel, she whispered, you're cheating on me. Not a question. A verdict. Ella looked up then, sensing the shift in the air. Mommy? Sophia closed her eyes. What followed was a blur. Daniel left the table, pacing the room. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. But the silence between his words was deafening. He asked for names. Dates. Details. She tried to explain, but every word she offered only made it worse. He kept repeating, how could you, like it was the only sentence he could form. She told him she hadn't meant to. That it just happened. That she had felt alone. Unseen. You should have talked to me, he said, voice cracking. Not found someone else. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room. He barely looked at her. Dinner was eaten in silence. Ella picked up on everything, asking softly, did you and Daddy have a fight? Sophia nodded, biting back tears. A big one. Daniel didn't speak to her the next day. Or the next. Liam texted, asking if she was okay. She stared at the message and didn't reply. There was nothing okay about this. What had felt like love, or something close to it, was now a jagged wound across the life she had built. Her home was no longer warm. Her husband, no longer her partner. Even Ella had become distant, confused by the tension she couldn't yet understand. The affair had been a spark, yes. But the fire it started was burning everything down. And Sophia, for the first time, wasn't sure if she'd survive the damage. The days that followed were quiet, but not the peaceful kind. More like walking through the ashes of something that had burned to the ground. Daniel still hadn't decided if he was going to leave. But his silence was heavy. It echoed through the house louder than any shouting match ever could. He slept in the guest room. Spoke only when necessary. Looked at Sophia like she was a stranger. Sophia, meanwhile, was unraveling. She had always thought she understood right and wrong. She had never imagined herself capable of being the one who cheats. She used to read stories like hers and judge harshly. But now she understood something no outsider could. It wasn't always about lust. Sometimes, it was about feeling alive again. Still, the betrayal was undeniable. No matter how deeply she had been hurting in her marriage, what she had done was a choice. And that choice had torn her family apart. She avoided Liam. His messages came daily at first, kind, concerned, full of apologies and hope. I miss you. I still believe what we had was real. Please don't disappear. You weren't just an affair to me. But Sophia couldn't respond. Not now. Not while the weight of her actions sat so heavily on her chest. What they had shared might have felt real, but it had also been rooted in secrecy, in lies, in stolen time. How could anything built in the shadows ever survive the light? She started therapy on her own. The first session, she couldn't even speak for the first 10 minutes. Just sat there, eyes full of shame, hands shaking. "I think I broke my life," she finally whispered. The therapist nodded gently. "Sometimes, we break things because they've already been cracked for a long time. But healing starts with honesty. With yourself first." Honesty. That word haunted her. She began writing in a journal, letters she'd never send. To Daniel. To Liam. To herself. "You were lonely," she wrote in one. "But you let that loneliness become permission. That wasn't fair to anyone. Least of all yourself." She watched Ella more closely now. Studied the way her daughter looked at both parents like she was waiting for the world to shift again. It broke Sophia's heart to realize that even though Ella didn't know all the details, she knew enough to feel the distance. Daniel finally spoke one night, after Ella was asleep. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said quietly, staring out the window. "But I'm trying not to hate you." Sophia didn't ask for forgiveness. Not yet. She only nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She had wanted so badly to feel something again. To wake up from the numbness. And now, she felt everything. Loss. Regret. Grief. Clarity. The consequences were real. And the reflection was harsh. But beneath the wreckage, something unexpected began to stir, a question. Not, "Can I fix this?" but, "Who do I want to become now?" 6 months had passed. The storm had settled, though not without leaving scars. The house was quieter now, not from tension, but from change. Daniel had decided to stay, at least for the time being. Not for Sophia. Not even for Ella. But for himself, to see if healing was possible, if trust could be rebuilt one fragile day at a time. They attended counseling together, slowly unpacking the years of distance that had quietly eroded their marriage. There were tears. Accusations. Long silences. Some days ended in exhausted arguments. Others in tentative, tearful apologies. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was the gritty, uncomfortable work of two people trying to dig through the wreckage to see if anything still lived underneath. And strangely, they found things they had forgotten. Like the way Daniel used to leave notes in Sophia's bag before big meetings. Or how Sophia had once stayed up all night helping him through a panic attack, whispering stories just to keep him grounded. They weren't back to normal. In truth, they would never be. But they were trying. As for Liam, he faded, as all things born in secrecy eventually do. He reached out twice more. Sophia never answered. Not because she didn't care. But because she finally understood, what they shared wasn't meant to last, it was meant to reveal. To shake her awake. To show her what she had become and force her to face it. She grieved him in quiet moments. A song on the radio. A smell in the air. The memory of a touch that had made her feel whole when she felt most broken. But she didn't reach back. Because closure, she realized, isn't something someone else can give you. It's the moment you decide you no longer need it to move on. Sophia started doing small things for herself. Not out of guilt, but from growth. She took long walks in the evening. Journaled daily. Reconnected with friends she had drifted from. She began drawing again, something she hadn't done since college. Just lines and colors at first. Then portraits. Then memories. One day, she painted a woman standing in two shadows, one behind her, one cast ahead. It was, she realized, a self-portrait. Ella was doing better too. Her laughter returned, brighter and less hesitant. She still asked questions sometimes, her young mind sensing the shifts but not fully grasping the depth of them. Sophia promised herself to always answer honestly, age-appropriately, yes, but honestly. Because lies, Sophia had learned, don't just hurt others. They hollow you from the inside. There was no fairy tale ending. No dramatic reunion kiss in the rain. But there was healing. And honesty. And the slow, painful beauty of starting over, not as the woman she used to be, or the one she pretended to be, but someone new. Someone real. She would never forget what happened. She would carry the lessons with her always. But for the first time in a long time, Sophia looked at herself in the mirror, and didn't look away. 11.